Welcome to Texas 2036's new virtual series, Straight Talk Texas, where you have a front row seat to conversations on topics important to our future. My name is Enisha Williams, Director of Board and External Affairs here at Texas 2036. Today's conversation will feature Texas 2036 President and CEO Margaret Spellings and J Puckett, Managing Director and Senior Partner at Boston Consulting Group here in Dallas. Their discussion will focus on the impact COVID-19 is having on our education system and lessons learned when we face another crisis, Hurricane Katrina. Over to you, Margaret.
Thanks, Anisha, and welcome all. This is a timely topic, that's for sure, with 5 million school children in Texas out of school. And I'm thrilled to be here with my friend J Puckett. Jay and I have worked together on a lot of projects in education. And met right after I was appointed Secretary of Education, when I asked him to come and help me reorganize the Department of Education, which he did. And shortly thereafter, Hurricane Katrina hit, and he was one of the first calls I made to help us deal with that disaster. So we'll get to that. But I first want to ask you, Jay, what are you observing as you talk with your colleagues and peers and educators and leaders around the country about the implications for our schools of the situation that we're in now, this massive dislocation and of so many students and so many educators?
Yes, this has obviously been a big shock to all of us, Margaret, and I appreciate you inviting me to talk about it with you and Texas 2036. We're seeing obviously one of the biggest, as you say, dislocations that we have seen ever, and all the schools are really closed. Many of them, I think, anticipated at this point to be closed through most of the balance of the school year, and kids are at home with their parents. Many of them just trying to figure out how to bootstrap their learning on a day-to-day basis. Just from an educational standpoint, it's presenting a huge number of challenges.
Well, and I think there are some silver linings for sure. One of which is people are understanding how important our schools are to our own lives, our communities. They facilitate meals and learning support and emotional support, friendships, community events, sports, and on and on and on. So it's a real loss for all of us. And I think many of us even feel some grief about the lack of routine that those schools provide. Let's talk about what is happening, and that is online learning and what you're seeing. Is there a silver lining in this, that we're going to get much better about how we deploy and really harness online learning to the good of our schools and our students?
Well, it's a great question. I think all of us are experiencing, those of us in a working world are experiencing new ways of working, being on video 10 and 12 hours a day. And that's a new way for all of us. But I think pretty much every parent is trying to figure out how to find ways for their kids to continue to be exposed to educational opportunities. And many of those parents are struggling to find things because the offerings that are out there, while there are some good ones, many of them are subscale or fragmented or just difficult to find, or they have a paywall that you have to go through when you try to find it. So it's a challenging environment, for many people. We have begun to have some hopeful conversations. In fact, just this week there was an announcement made of a nationwide effort that's a number of media companies coming together and technology companies coming together, led by the Emerson Collective and Amplify and Common Sense Media, to open an organization called Wide Open Schools. And it's early days. It only was announced this week, but it's an example of somebody trying to scale learning at home.
Yeah, the other thing I think we're seeing some innovation around is human capital. How are our teachers and counselors and school administrators better deployed for a situation like this? And one example I saw was they had pooled all the fourth grade teachers in this, I think it was a charter school actually in New York, and had one teacher teaching the math for the entire section of fourth graders, so that the other teachers would be freed to make individual contact with those students. And so I guess my question is, what are you seeing beyond just technology about how we deploy other assets like our people, most especially in our teachers?
As we think about what technology can allow us to do if we really use it fully, a teacher, has for our whole lifetimes, a teacher has really been this magical bundle of capabilities. So a teacher has to be a lecturer. They have to be a proctor, a coach, a friend, somebody that you can confide in, somebody that's comfortable for you, and all of those things in one physical package in a classroom. And what technology allows is, if somebody has particular strengths as a lecturer, they're the best math lecturer, and somebody else has great skills as a facilitator, and somebody else has great skills as an advisor, then those can be unbundled, and we can reassemble them in new ways, with both in-person components and remote or technology-based components. And I think that does offer new opportunities if we're willing to be imaginative about it.
Let's talk about Katrina and lessons learned, hard ones often. We often use the expression, if you had a blank sheet of paper, what would you do? And in that instance, in a very traumatic, heartrending and often deadly way, we did have a blank sheet of paper to truly reinvent a major urban school district. That's when you were recruited to go lead that effort. Talk about the theory of action. What did you all do?
Well, of course, it was a huge tragedy. You had I think it was 67,000 kids that showed up, one day for school, and then the storm hit, and then the city was empty, and all the schools were closed, all the families were displaced, all the teachers were gone, and so it really was, of course, a tragedy, but in many ways it also created an opportunity to think more holistically about the situation. It might be helpful to just explain a little bit about the starting position, because even before Katrina hit, it was really a very underperforming school district and was not serving the community, as you well know.
And I think they owned the Department of Education $10 million or something in addition.
There were that's right. There were real financial distresses, but as you say, bankrupt in more ways than that. They were ranked on student achievement second to the bottom of all parishes in Louisiana. They had turned over 8 superintendents in 8 years, and there was just a lot of disruption and a lot of mistrust on the part of the community in the quality of the school system. And so when everything emptied out in 2005, there was a group that was rallied together. You sent some people from the Department of Ed down there, Scott Cowan from Tulane University, the Gates Foundation, the Broad Foundation, Teach for America. There were great people, other people from the state of Louisiana that were involved, but there was a brainstorm coalition that really looked at the fact base, looked at best practices, and thought about how can we improve this. And the basic theory that was put in place was to take it from a failed school system to an operational system of schools. And that meant bringing in multi-operators, allowing parents the choice to send their kids to the school they thought could do the best for their kids, and then letting the dollars follow that choice. And so that gave all the schools a chance to really work their best to get the kids to come there.
So talk about whether those lessons in that sort of choice way are applicable in this instance, and also talk about, Jay, because when those students fled, many of them came to Texas, and what the implications were for the receivers, temporarily or otherwise.
Right. I think one of the things that was discovered as a part of that was that wherever those kids went, when they did initial assessments, they found that those kids, many of them were far behind their age equivalent peers in the places where they landed. And so there had to be new situations put in place there. That's the parallel I would say in this situation is it's a big dislocation in many ways, just like Katrina was. People are not in the school where they were. That they aren't in an environment, at least temporarily, where they can learn as effectively, and that was certainly the case with Katrina. And then I would say, but there is an opportunity to innovate and hopefully send kids back to a better operating model. And that was true, I would say, and would be similarities across both environments, even though mainly there we were talking about how do you make the physical environment better and the instructional environment better. In this situation, we may have the opportunity to do blended learning in a way that we never really imagined before.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I'm thinking a lot about, of course, is, progress, accountability and assessment. And how are we going to discern who can and should and is ready to advance to the next grade with this learning time lost? And how will school districts do that fairly? What should we do about personnel evaluations? And how do we think about just kind of the management and measurement piece of this dilemma that is before us?
Well, that's been a challenge even before COVID, of course, and one that has been much discussed. I would say, we all know that as individual parents that we want to have a high quality teacher in front of every classroom. I know from all the work that we've done in our education practice, wherever we go in the world, that is one of the primary drivers of value creation for kids, is that they have a high quality teacher in front of them. And so we have to have a way of measuring that and encouraging more of that, both in terms of, the most talented people in our communities becoming teachers, and then those that are already teachers becoming the best teachers that they can be. And so I think that evaluation system is an important part of that. And then assessments, I think, are often maligned, in society today. But the reality is, it does the kids a lot of good if you can know what they're learning versus what they really need to learn in order to progress to the next grade or to succeed in a modern society. And the only way to know that is through some form of assessment and through some form of holding ourselves account to giving those kids the opportunities to learn the things that are going to help them, move toward their dreams and move toward self-sufficiency.
And of course, this year will be absent that standardized STAR test that is, whether you like it or not, valid and reliable and psychometrically sound and comparable. What will that mean for admissions and for school promotions and grade assessments and all of that? What will we need to rely on in the absence of that?
Well, I think that's going to be a challenge and one that we need to look at the options that are available there. When kids come into kindergarten and they first start kindergarten, they take a kindergarten readiness assessment, right? I mean, we could imagine putting in place assessments that would tell where kids are upon their return, and this is a really good opportunity to think about something like that, because there will be kids that'll get great remote learning opportunities, or they have their parent is a teacher, or they're going to have an opportunity to continue to learn at a regular rate while they're at home. There'll be other kids that won't have that opportunity. And so we have to have a way of putting a yardstick against it and figuring out how to help these kids individually and make sure that they're in the right classroom environment for where their starting position is. I think there's another issue on this one, though, Margaret, which is when we have one super high stakes assessment that happens at the end of a year, as opposed to a series of assessments that can combine formative assessments and summative assessments, so we can know more regularly where kids are. We will be more resilient when crises like this arise, because you'll at least you won't have to refer back a year. You can refer back to the last assessment to know. And then you also have in place the ability to do those throughout the year rather than just once a year.
Well, and that's another value of embedded technology. When we get the technology right, we'll be able to do that a whole lot better and more seamlessly as well. Jay, I'd be remiss if I did not ask you, given your keen interest in these workforce issues, we have a perfect storm going on here with COVID and the implications, and then the incredible economic distress that we're experiencing, and will more so in coming days, especially in the oil and gas and other industries that are so relevant to our fiscal picture. So talk about how we're going to use this opportunity to retool, reskill, and make relevant our student population for the jobs of the future.
No, that's a very important issue, and in fact, even since the last couple of weeks, our unemployment rate went from a very low, around 3%, to closer to almost 10%, and the dislocations are very meaningful. And certain industries are much harder struck than others. And if you look at the state of Texas versus the U.S., we tend to over-index on some of those higher risk industries, and so we're going to have probably more displacement as a result of this. I mean, I've seen estimates as high as 3 million people that will be out of work as a result of this. And I think, as a part of that, we have to deal with the short-term issues of displacement to try to, make this a V shape more than a U shape in terms of our recovery. And get people back to work. And that includes, simple things like making sure people that lose their job in one retail environment, maybe, get a job in another environment like, Walmart and Amazon that are hiring so many people. And so making sure that we broker that well. And there are intermediaries that are thinking about that. But longer term, it exposes a bigger weakness, which is that we already have structural problems where we lack skills in our society that people need to succeed in jobs today, and we have high demand jobs or high need areas where people just don't have the education to do it. So we have a lot of work to fix both of those issues: the short-term discontinuities and then the long-term reskilling and upskilling.
Yeah, amen. We just have a couple of minutes left, so I want to ask you one last question about what policymakers can do and should be thinking about in terms of priority. I mean, there are just an avalanche of issues that are being considered and will need to be considered, from the ones that you just mentioned about our revenue base and unemployment and just short-term dislocation, broadband and technology, health, and on and on and on. How might you, as a whiz-bang management consultant, help people think about, well, what should we do first, and if where should our first dollar monies go? How do we think about priorities now?
Well, I mean, in the current environment, of course, that some of those priorities have to go toward flattening this curve, that we have, so that we can get back to a place where we're not in the midst of a disease spread. But as soon as we can get our hands around the suppression of that curve, I think the notion of how do we fight back so that we can recover our economy and get our schools back up and going and not overwhelm our healthcare system in the process, and then how do we plan for our future? And I think what you're really asking about, particularly at Texas 2036, is how do we prepare for the future, and how do we think about being more resilient as an economy? And for that, we have to get the basics right, which means, can kids get off to an early start and be able to read by the time they get to the third grade? We have to get these workforce discontinuities right. Are we offering the right degree programs that are aligned with high need job areas? We have to work in a more organized way across the various parts of government, the public and private sector. We have to have facts to make decisions with. And so all of those challenges, I think, feed into policy priorities, that we can tackle.
Thank you, Jay. And thanks for taking time to visit with us. Anisha, I'll kick it back to you to round out the conversation. And thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Jay, for joining us. And thank you all for watching Straight Talk Texas. If you have questions and feedback, we want to hear from you. Email us at straighttalk@texas2036.org and follow us on social media and sign up to receive our emails. Visit texas2036.org for more information. Until next time, wishing you and your family well.